Java tutorial 7, we're looking at getting input from the user using the scanner class. And the first thing we're going to do is import the scanner class. So at the very top of our program, above the class scanner tutorial, at the very top, we're going to write import java.util.scanner and note the capital S on the scanner. So this imports the scanner class into our program. Without this statement, our program can't use a scanner. And next we're going to make a scanner. So we're going to say scanner scnr equals new scanner, and then in brackets we're going to write system.in. So scnr is the name of our new scanner that we've just made, and with scnr we can do lots of awesome stuff. To get an example of what the scanner can do, we're just going to ask the user a question. We'll say system.out.println, how many dogs do you have? And then on the next line, we're going to store the number of dogs that the user has inside of an integer. So we'll say int num dogs equals scnr dot next int. And then let's just print out you have plus num dogs plus dogs. And we'll save and run this. So we have how many dogs do you have? And I'll type 9 and then hit enter. And then it says you have 9 dogs. And let's run our program again because we're going to intentionally crash it this time. We're going to see what happens if we answer with something that isn't an integer. So if we say I have 9 dogs, then our program's going to crash because this is a string right here. So the scnr next int method is going to come looking for an integer, and it's expecting this answer to be an integer, but this is a string. And so as soon as we hit enter right here, the program's going to crash. In the next tutorial, we're going to look at validating user input to make sure that the user can only enter an integer here. I'll link to that video in the description, but for now we're just going to leave our program as it is because that's a whole nother topic. Next, we're going to use a different scanner method called nextLine. And we're going to do it above this code that we have right here, and we'll see why after. So we'll do it under where we've declared the scanner, but above this code down here. We'll just write system.out.println, type a sentence and hit enter. And then on the next line, we'll write string user string. So we've just made a string that is named user string, and then inside of that string we're going to store what is returned by the method scnr next line. So the next line method is going to take the whole line that the user types in up to and including the enter key character, which might seem kind of irrelevant right now, but it's going to be relevant in a sec once we switch up our code. And I'll just write a print statement in here to print out the user string. We'll say you typed plus the string. Type a sentence and hit enter. You typed I like plants, and then it asks us how many dogs do you have. I'll say 9 dogs. You have 9 dogs. Next, we're going to switch up the order of these two questions. So we're going to put how many dogs do you have above, type a sentence and hit enter. I'll just cut and paste these 3 lines and put them down beneath here. And now we're going to run this code. We get how many dogs do you have? 9. And then I hit enter, and then the rest of this prints out. It says type a sentence and hit enter. I didn't even type anything, but now it says you typed. To understand what's happening here, we need to take a quick look at what actually happens when we call nextInt and nextLine. So the input that the user types in is stored in something called the buffer. So when the user types in a sentence, I like plants, then I like plants is stored in the buffer. And when the user hits the enter key, then the enter key is in the buffer. When we call the method next line, then this entire line is taken from the buffer and stored into the user string, including the enter character. But when we call next int, so if the user types 9 and then hits enter, the next int method works differently than the next line method. The next line grabs the entire line, including the enter character, but the next int only grabs the next int. It doesn't grab the enter character from the buffer. So we asked, how many dogs do you have? And then the user typed 9 and then hit enter. So then next int came in and took the 9, but that leaves us with the enter character still left in the buffer. So the program says type a sentence and hit enter, but the enter character is still left in the buffer. So the program thinks that the user has hit enter right away. So it grabs the next line, which is not anything printable. It's just the enter character, and then it moves on in the program. So anytime we use the methods next int, next double, or next, then if we want to use next line after them, we need to do something called flushing the buffer. If we're using next int and then next int right away, then we're not going to need to flush the buffer. What happens if we use next int twice in a row is, say the user types in 9 and then hits enter, then next int comes in and grabs the next int that's in there. And then if we called the next int method again right after, then it comes in here and it sees, okay, there's just an enter character in here. There is no integer for me to grab, so let's wait for some user input. Whereas next line works differently in that it comes in here and it sees, oh, there's an enter character to grab. That's a line, let's grab the enter character. So anytime we use one of these methods and we want to call next line next, then we have to flush the buffer. So let's do that right now. Let's get rid of this second next int. And we're just going to write scnr dot next line. And notice we're not even storing this in a variable because we don't want it. There's nothing we can do with this. When we call next line, then it's just going to come in and it's going to grab the enter character. So then the buffer is going to be empty. So then when we call next line down here, then there's an empty buffer. And so the program's going to wait for some user input so that it can grab the next line. So now if we run this, it's going to work okay and it's going to wait for us. How many dogs do you have? 9. Type a sentence and hit enter. So it's working now because we flushed that extra enter character out of the buffer when we used the next line. Next, we'll quickly look at the next double and next methods. They're both pretty straightforward. We'll say enter a decimal number. And then we'll say double my double equals scnr dot next double, and then we'll print out my double. And while we're at it, we'll show how the next method works. We'll say system.out.print, and this time let's say enter another sentence so that we can see how the next method works. We'll say string user word equals scnr dot next. The next method is just going to grab the next sequence of characters from the buffer up to the next space. So if we type in a sentence, it's just going to grab the first word of the sentence, and then it's going to store that in user word. And then if we called it again right after, then it's just going to store the next word in the sentence into user word 2. So it grabs the next sequence of characters from the buffer and leaves everything else in the buffer after that sequence of characters in the space. And then let's print out the user words. I'll say system.out.print user word plus a space plus user word 2. Let's save and run this. How many dogs do you have? 9. Type a sentence. enter a decimal number, enter another sentence. So we called scanner next twice. The first time took the I, and the second time we called it took the word also. And then we printed out word 1 plus space plus word 2. There's one more scanner method I want to look at. We haven't covered while loops in these tutorials yet, but I'm going to use one right now just to show how this last method works. I'm going to say while scnr dot has next. Has next is a method that checks if there's still another token in the input. A token is just the sequence of characters up to the space that we talked about. So it's going to check if there's another complete token in the input and return either true or false. True if there is a token and false if there is not. And as long as there is another token in the input, then let's store that token in a string called word. So we'll say scnr.next, and that will grab the word and store it in word, and then we're going to print out the word. So this while loop is going to keep executing as long as there is another word in the input. So has next will keep returning a value of true as long as there is another token in the input, and then we'll grab that token and we'll print it out to the console. So up here we have enter another sentence. The user will enter a sentence. The first word will be taken from it. The second word will be taken from it. Those two words will be printed to the console. And as long as there are any more words still left in the input, then they're going to be printed to the console. So let's run this right now and see what happens. How many dogs do you have? 9, type a sentence and hit enter. I like plants, enter a decimal number. And this time I won't enter a decimal number. I'm just going to type 90. And Java's just going to take this and turn it into a decimal number so that it can store it in the double. And then we'll enter another sentence. I like plants and I also like dogs. Hit enter. And there's our first two words that got grabbed from the first two times we called the next method. So it prints those out, and then we have this while loop. So as long as the input still has another word in it, then that word gets stored in the string word and printed to the screen. So all the rest of the words that are left in the input get printed to the screen until has next returns false, because there's nothing left in the input. And if we wanted all of these words on the same line, then we could just get rid of the ln here, just say system.out.print, and then we'll add a space before word right here. So we'll say space plus word. The print method is just like println, but it doesn't print it on a new line. And then we'll have to change this one up here to print instead of println as well. And now everything's all going to print out on the same line. How many dogs? 9. I like plants. 90. I like plants and dogs. All on the same line down here. And the has next method also exists for integers. So has next int. If we have a list of ints, then we could use a while loop with has next int, and it also exists for has next double and has next line.